Sure. All right, last class we were talking about how someone is allowed to praise someone else as long as it's not excessive and as long as that the person being praised, his enemies aren't present. Because if you praise the guy when his enemies are present, it's going to cause the enemies to say, oh yeah, really? I know this about him, so on and so forth. So, the Chafetz Chaim continues on this theme, and he says, V'kol zeh im eno meshabecho barabim. All of this that we say Reuven is allowed to praise Shimon is only when the Reuven is not praising him publicly. Aval barabim asur bekol gavne. It's always prohibited to praise another person publicly, even when the enemies are not next to him, and even when the praise is not excessive. The reason is, Kibim sibat anashim rabim, when you have a lot of people, ragil leimatzeh sham mayminim usmaelim, you are going to find some people leaning right, some people leaning left. In other words, some people who might look at this person positively, and others who are always critical. O mekanim, or you're going to find jealous people. And when you start praising this guy in public, it will lead to people disparaging him. So there's a scenario here. A sales manager effusively praises his new salesman in front of the entire department at a meeting. Afterwards, two veteran salesmen question the boss's impression of the new employee, highlighting several of his flaws. Praising his new employee in a public forum was a violation of avak Lashon Hara. Remember, that's what we're talking about, the dust of Lashon Hara, as it had the potential to stir some hearers to envy and to Lashon Hara, as indeed happened. Now, there is an exception where a person wants to praise an outstanding individual, who's established in the community and known in the community as a kosher guy. He's righteous, upstanding, in whom no fault can be found. With regard to that person, you can praise him even in front of someone who might be jealous, even in front of someone who might dislike him. Because his reputation is so sterling and perfect that the guy is not going to disparage him. And even if he does disparage him, everybody's going to know that you don't even know what you're talking about, because we know that this guy is tzaddik v'kasher. So, scenario D, one is permitted to praise a hatan and kala at their sheva brachot. You're also allowed to praise an honoree at a dinner, given the recognition of his public service. Or, ad ma'avesrin, a deceased person at their eulogy. Since one of the purposes of participating in the gathering is to hear praises of these individuals, it can be assumed that the listeners will not object to the praises they hear at the gathering. However, one should be careful not to overly exaggerate. Okay? So there are certain circumstances where you are allowed to praise, as listed over here, but generally, one should not do it in public. He does have here a small note in the Haggaha, where he says, if the speaker surmises that the listeners will not disparage Shimon upon hearing his praise, maybe they don't even know who Shimon is, then you are allowed to praise Shimon, even in public, as long as he doesn't do so excessively. Next, halacha gimel klal tet. Gam yesh lo le'adam leizaher. One has to be careful. Mileshabeach et havero b'shevach haba lidei hefsed. To praise someone in a manner that will lead to his loss. Ka'inyan ha'oreach sheyetzeh birchov ha'ir. For example, it's forbidden for a guest to go to the town square, v'farsem lakol, et asher gmalo balabai tova b'achila u'shtiyah. That the balabait, the host, he was at a guy's house for Shabbat, and this guy gave him like the best food, okay, and like the best drinks, the best meats for Shabbat. The guy, and he's publicizing this to everybody. What's the problem? Okay, And he also extended great hospitality. What's the problem with that? All a bunch of empty people, okay, people who you might not want in your house, are going to gather. They're going to go to this guy's house and exhaust his funds. If someone blesses his friend loudly from early in the morning, it's a curse for that person. And it can be inferred from this, the same applies with regard to someone who receives a loan from his friend. The guy goes around publicizing, Shimon gave me a loan of $100,000. Interest free. Of course, it has to be interest free. But he gave me $100,000. What's going to happen? A lot of people who might not be so trustworthy to give it back are going to go approach Shimon and say, hey, I heard you're lending out money. I need money too. And he's not going to be able to extricate himself from them. So note here says, a man praises his child's yeshiva tuition chairman for his generous, hassle-free scholarship awards. Soon, those who hear about it apply for scholarships, even though they are not in need. They overwhelm the yeshiva's capacity, resulting in needy families being left unassisted, and in tighter rules for the coming year. The man's praise, although well-intended, was avak lashon hara, and resulted in harassment of the chairman and a loss for needy families. Who would think that that type of thing would be so relevant? In fact, the Gemara in Masechet Bava Metzia writes, connected to this, that one of the three things that a Talmid Chacham is allowed to lie about, he can literally lie, is ushpiza. Ushpiza means his host. This is in my references. So if a Talmid Chacham goes to someone's house and he had an amazing time, okay, and someone asks him, "No, how was it over at the guy's house?" You could say, "It was all right. It's good." Like he doesn't have to go over and say how great it was, because again, all bunch of people are now going to go knock on this guy's door, deplete him of his funds because of all the things that they would expect. One is also obligated to guard his mouth and tongue, not to speak in a manner that people become suspect in what he says. So that people will regard him as a Lashon Hara speaker. If a person is not careful and causes others to suspect him of speaking Lashon Hara, hu bichlal avak Lashon Hara. This falls under the category of avak Lashon Hara. So he brings it here in Haggadah. The reason I did not mention the case of someone who says there's a fire in so and so's home, be'inyan avak, as an example of avak Lashon Hara. So, for example, the note here says, Reuven may not declare, you can always find a fire in Shimon's home. Fire meaning Shimon has a lot of money, so therefore his oven is always working. There's always cooking going on in Shimon's home, because that has a negative connotation. It can imply that Shimon either eats a lot of food, okay, he's always making food, that's not something generally implied that is good. So Chavetz Chaim says, why didn't I bring that case? He says, even though I wrote in Klal Bet that it is a case of avak lashon hara, koro merashbam bavatra, ve'asharei tshuva leRabbeinu Yonah, ki raiti achar kach b'divrei Agad Maimoni, because I saw later on in the comments of the Rambam, umashma midirem du lashon hara gmura, that saying such a thing is not just avak lashon hara, but it's actual real lashon hara, because of and not just mere lashon hara. So he didn't include it into this halacha. Yes.
Can I boast about you how great a rabbi you are?
Oh, thank you. Not in public, please. Come to me privately. I'll be.
What is that allowed?
No, no difference. No difference. Someone might not think I'm such a great person and might lead him to say some lashon hara. So probably best. Listen, we all want to flatter people. I think we mentioned this before, right? Everybody looks for flattery in some way. It's a problem, right? The Torah warns us against flattery. Personally, it could lead someone to think, to be boastful, to think of himself as better than what he is. It leads to arrogance, it leads to haughtiness, and that's something we want to avoid at all costs. Of course, the Rambam says that's a midah that you want to stay far, far, far away from as much as possible. And by you flattering me or me flattering you, you tend to think of yourself as, oh well, maybe I'm a pretty good guy, right? But at the same time, I don't think it should be, confused with giving a person a pat on the back and recognition when he does something good. And I think that's something different. You do a good job, you're a dentist, and you performed a good job on the surgery or whatever, and I think there's nothing wrong with saying thank you, you did a fantastic job, but at the same time, if I was to go on a public forum and say so-and-so is the unbelievable doctor, so-and-so is an unbelievable engineer, and then someone might not have had that same experience, then it could lead him to, or out of jealousy, because he could be another doctor or dentist, and may think something different. Doing things in public is not recommended, as the Rambam says, as the Chafetz Chaim says, because it could lead to avak lashon hara, or it is avak lashon hara. So it's finding that right balance. It's always good to be to give positive feedback when need, make people feel good so that they could work harder. Because you want that, people that have employees, and you want to be told by your boss that that you're doing a good job, so that you can produce more. Otherwise, you may not produce. If I'm not being recognized for the things that I'm doing, then why should I work hard? I just do the basic things, and then you find less production. So it's finding that balance that I think is crucial. Yeah.
So you said there was 3 instances of somebody could lie.
Yes.
Did you mention the other?
The other two, one of them is called is Masechta, which is a rabbi, Machloket Rashi and Tosfot here. If someone asks a rabbi what he's learning, okay, if he has a question, can he answer? Can he say he doesn't know? So Rashi says you're allowed to say I don't know the answer. Tosfot disagrees with that. Tosfot says, what are you talking about? It's a rabbi's obligation to say that you have to. Rabbi's obligation to answer. If you're a student, you're asking me a question, and I know the answer. Why would I tell you I don't know? So Tosfot says the meaning is that the guy who's asking the question is not there because he really wants to know an answer. He just wants to bother you and see whether or not you know. In that situation, the rabbi is allowed to lie and say I don't know. And the second one is Puria. Puria is literally means pru or vu. So believe it or not, according to Rashi, it means that a student goes and asks the rabbi whether he was intimate with his wife the night before, and there the rabbi, even if he was, can lie. Tosfot says, who in the right mind would even ask that question? So that can't be that can't be the meaning. So according to Tosfot, it was a guy who was in yeshiva, he came late, okay, because he had to go to the mikveh. Okay, and he went to the mikveh because he had relations with his wife, and he was motzi shichat zera. He had to go to the mikveh, and therefore, if someone asks him why were you late, he doesn't have to say I went to the mikveh. He could say I was caught in traffic or whatever. So that's how Tosfot interprets it. So those are the 3 things. Okay, we'll continue next time. B'ezrat Hashem.